right, welcome to Behind the Point Spread, your weekly look at some of the biggest games in college football and, of course, a game in the National Football League. I'm Travis Justice. Before we get started tonight, a quick reminder, if you could do us a favor and give this video a like, just all you have to do is hit that like button. It's very, very simple, and that'll be very, very simple. If you have any comments tonight, just go ahead and leave them in the comments section. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And, of course, if you have time and you're watching on YouTube, take just another second to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we're trying to grow our audience base. Of course, I'm here each and every week, but so are these two gentlemen live from Las Vegas. Right by me is Scott Spreitzer. Down below, because we give him all the space that he needs, the one, the only, Dr. Rob Zadiska. What's going on, gentlemen?
Can I get like a widescreen?
I think it's as wide as it gets. You're already in 16:9.
I got a large head.
Yeah. Well, you do. You know, and your head looks bigger with that goatee. That goatee's getting like thicker, Rob. I mean, you look at Scott's. He's gray. He's the old man. He's the oldest one here. Mine's getting gray, but yours is like super thick. I have a feeling if you could grow like that brewer's beard. You know what I'm saying? I can't grow.
I want to grow this out to where I can run my fingers through it.
Oh, how would your patients think about that?
I can't. They're usually asleep.
See, Scott, think about this.
Anesthesiologist, come on.
He could go like full Captain Lou Albano. Remember Captain Lou Albano from the old days? You could put like rubber bands in your goatee.
I did have a patient recently who, I mean, had like the most magnificent beard. I mean, it was like the full-on, like foot-long goatee. The thing was great, and I mean, just kind of to keep it out of the way during surgery, he did like ponytail it up in rubber bands.
Well, it seems like when you go into surgery, they shave like every part of your body. They shave your pubes, they shave your legs. It's like, I'm surprised they didn't want to shave the beard.
We only shave the part that's having surgery, Travis.
They shave.
I want to know where you're having surgery that they're shaving all that.
Pubes the last time. I had my gallbladder out.
Okay, well, if it's an abdominal surgery, they do kind of shave the whole abdomen. So,
Scott, aren't you just amazed at the conversations you walk in the middle of sometimes? We don't have anything scripted here, as most people can tell. I mean,
what were the odds that shaved pubes would be stated on this show tonight? That's what I want to know. I mean, I'm not going to help you there.
We're talking about power ratings and point spreads, and somehow Trav will figure out a way to bring that into the
all I know. Matter. Okay, I'm going to go down a really dark road. I've lost 60-some pounds, and all I'm saying is it makes a difference in that area. I can't imagine if I shaved down there now. I'd be like, yeah, I haven't been. Sorry,
Trav, for you, every little bit helps. I'm sure
it really does. Every little bit helps. Speaking of every little bit helps, how about the news that Nebraska goes after Dana Holgorsen to come in as an offensive consultant? Are they sending Scott Satterfield a message here?
I would say so.
I got to figure out like where I'm pointing. There we go. Right.
Yeah, there we go.
I got to triangulate my screen here.
What do you think? I mean, Scott, let's start with you. I mean, you've obviously, when he was at West Virginia and Houston, you follow him from an offensive coach and the points that he puts up. You watch it in a much different light than I think a fan does. You look at it from an analytical standpoint, a math standpoint, and you're a Nebraska fan. When you saw they were bringing Dana Holgorsen in, what were your thoughts?
Anybody but Satterfield, and so. Damn. Holgorsen is a very good offensive coach. He's going to change things up a bit. He's not going to make too many boneheaded decisions along the way. He can look at the weak offensive line that he has and start calling some plays built around the players he has, instead of trying to get players to fit where they don't, the old round hole in a square, square peg in a round hole deal. And I think that's where Holgersen's going to help the most. The play calling's been sad, and really, when's the last time Nebraska had, let's say, 3 consecutive possessions where the offensive line played well? I'm going to say second quarter of the Colorado game.
Yeah.
3 possessions. I mean, that's how bad it is.
I agree.
The offensive line's bad. Player development is horrible, at least it looks like from the outside looking in. Rayola's not playing up to the level he was week 2 and week 3. And so I think it's, they got a lot of stuff going on there. They got to get some linemen in that could at least, be third string on Doc Rob's Husker teams back in the day, let alone starting. And so it's frustrating. I'm watching and then I'm watching some of those plays. I agree with you guys. I did watch your guys' recap of going forward on 4th down. Obviously, the last one was desperation. You got to do it. Going forward on 4th and goal at the 5 or the 6 when you're down 13 with 12 minutes to go in the game was a dumb move. Not just because it didn't work. It was a dumb move, even if it did work.
And strategically at that point in the game, you kick the field goal.
Absolutely. And so I thought that was a bad move. And it's just a situation right now where there's just nobody on the same page, it looks like, on offense. It's an absolute mess. So bring Dana in. Back to Dana real quick. Liked him at West Virginia. I thought he had a great offensive mind everywhere he's been. I'm not sure he's a CEO type, but I think he's really good at the level he's being brought in for Nebraska. And hopefully he's going to be able to, look at what the offense has done, look at the players they have, how he can fit the play calling for those players, and have other people stand out of his way so he can give it a shot. Full Dana Holgorsen 100% offensive coaching. If they allow that, they can turn this around quick. The wrench in the system was thrown by USC today. They said, see you to their quarterback. Basically, we're benching you. We're bringing the transfer in against Nebraska in 2 weeks. They're off this week. Also, USC. Jordan Mailata from UNLV, who played for the Rebels last year, transferred to US in the offseason. Not the most accurate of passers, but guess what, guys? Mobile as a mother hubbard. I mean, this guy can run. Fleet-footed. It's exactly what Lincoln Riley likes. I saw Travis over there getting on that 7-second delay system when I started with Mother.
But, you can cuss here. You can cuss here. We don't care. You can
tell you right now, this kid he can fly. And this gives all that game film Nebraska just sees or has of USC, toss it out the window. Completely different offense. Lincoln Riley brings in a mobile quarterback. It's what he likes. His other quarterback, always under pressure, couldn't move. It's going to be a whole different ball game at Memorial Stadium, or the Coliseum, I should say. I was looking at tickets 2 weeks ago. I decided I didn't want to pay $350 to sit upstairs at the Coliseum. So my couch is free, and that's where I'll be watching it from. Now, I'm sure the prices have dropped drastically since USC filled a 4-5 and Nebraska has been stinking it up. But still, it's going to be interesting because Nebraska's defense has a whole new USC offense to watch out for this coming week.
Rob, do you think Dana Holgorsen can make that many changes? There's 3 games left in the season. Can something wholesale change really be made in that short amount of time?
When you're looking at so we've talked a lot about how close the margin is for Nebraska in a lot of these games. I mean, you look at, that's a 1-score loss to UCLA. It's a 1-score loss to Illinois. I mean, these margins are like that. It's a 1-score loss to Ohio State. It's not that far off for them to get that 6th win. Now, I'm not saying they're getting it, but at this point, when the margins are that thin, anything can make a difference. And so, yeah, I do think it can make a difference. I mean, and some of it's just some of the decision making where, kind of like what Scott talked about, and we talked about the decision making in regards to going for those field goals earlier in the 4th quarter. Going for it on 4th down instead of going for it on the field goals in the 4th quarter. And so that's the kind of decision making that I think could change the outcome of some of these games. And you even go back and look at some of the I feel bad because I really should give credit to the guy who commented on this. And I read online, I'll probably think of it into the show, but one of the guys had done, I think it might have been Sam McEwen with the Omaha World Herald, did a breakdown on Nebraska's run game. And it's something like this astronomically high percentage of run plays are going in between the tackles. They're going right up the gut. And you're talking about an offensive line that just doesn't have the capability to generate the push right now. We saw a little bit of it early in the season, but again, arguably that was very much against weaker opponents. As you've gotten into the heart of the Big Ten schedule, the ability for Nebraska to run the ball inside, that's not really their strong suit, but that's where Satterfield runs all of his running plays. So why would you be calling run plays against Big Ten defenses when your inside run game is not the strength of that offense.
If you're Marcus,
4th and goal at the 6, real quick, guys, 4th and goal at the 5 or 6, whatever it was, 12 minutes to go in the 4th quarter. If you've got a really good offensive line that's keeping pass rushers off of your quarterback, if your receivers are getting some separation, which I think, Doc Rob, you talked about, it happened like twice in the whole game against UCLA, but you're making a push on the offensive line, maybe you think about going for it. But their offensive line was so bad and the receivers couldn't get separation. It's like, I just don't understand the thought process. And sometimes the metrics, when you're, sabermetrics, when you're talking about managing and coaching teams, sometimes you got to think about what goes into the metrics. I'll give you a real good example. In Major League Baseball, if you got a guy on first base and you're going to sack bunt with no outs to get him to second, you actually score fewer times sack bunting in baseball than you do if you swing away. It's not a big margin, but mathematically, you score more often if you swing away. You've got 27 outs. You don't give one away. Having said that, there are certain situations when you got to ignore the metrics because maybe your batter stinks on ice. Maybe he hasn't hit in 6 games. He's 1 for 26. Same thing with college football. Maybe the metrics say go for it on 4th and 4 at the 50. But when your offensive line stinks on ice, all of a sudden you got to think twice about those sabermetrics. So you really got to be thinking, you got to be on your toes. You've always got to be open-minded. And I don't think Satterfield was any of those.
Before we move on, do you think Satterfield's feeling the pressure now? I mean, you're bringing somebody in who's been a head coach, who's known as an offensive guru. Do you think he's sitting there going, I got somebody looking over my shoulder and my job's not safe?
If you're asking me, I'd do not.
His job is so not safe.
Well, yeah,
I mean, he's got to be.
And we talked about that on the podcast, which you can go back and listen to if you haven't listened to it yet, is that, this team is not well coached at this point. The culture does not seem to be where it needs to be. And wholesale change is probably going to take place at the end of the season. And you got to look at everything. I mean, Matt Rule's job is to win football games. And you have to do that by evaluating the talent, not only on the field, but what you have in the coaching room as well. Before we get started with tonight's games, don't forget, if you want to work with Scott Spreitzer on a weekly basis, you can. And it's just not for college football. We're talking college basketball, the National Football League, NBA, NHL, anything you name it. All you have to do is text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get the free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit www.docsports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. Normally we do 5 games. It's such a great week. We could have done 10 games. We could have done 20 games this week, but we added a bonus 6 games. So we're going to start with one game in the National Football League, the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Washington Commanders. Then look at this lineup in college football. And these may not even be the best games. I just kind of picked the games I was most interested in. You've got Colorado coming off a bye week in the thick of things in the Big 12 race, taking on Texas Tech, who just knocked off Iowa State. Iowa State, are they out of college football playoff contention? They go to Kansas. Looks like an easy game, but KU's been in like every game, just can't hold on to a lead. UCLA, coming off that win against Nebraska, takes on Iowa, who has found an offense, scores points, puts up yards, and is going to the Rose Bowl, where they have not won at the Rose Bowl Stadium since 1959. 1959, the last time Iowa's won at the Rose Bowl. And then how about these games in the SEC? Oh, yeah, Alabama against LSU. This has playoff implications. And we wrap things up tonight with Georgia and Ole Miss. I mean, seriously, is that an incredible slate of games tonight?
We could have
actually. I'm going back to that whole Iowa Rose Bowl thing. Why do Iowa fans want to go to the Rose Bowl so bad? They never win there.
They never. Well, and the weird thing is, and Scott, you'll remember this. The last time Iowa played UCLA, it was 1986 in the Rose Bowl. That's when Ronnie Harmon fumbled like 4 times. I mean, every Iowa fan today is still mad at Ronnie Harmon for fumbling the football as much as he did against the Bruins.
Well, any Iowa fan who has a chance to go watch this game, get there. I mean, it's a fabulous stadium. You've got trees growing up over the stadium. You've got a golf course at one end of the stadium across the parking lot. Pasadena is a great place to watch a game. You're going to be a lot safer than if you were going to the Nebraska USC game the next week at the Mausoleum. That's a bad place.
Mausoleum.
you make the wrong turn and your life is in your hands, and I'm not joking. But anyway, Pasadena is great. Rob played there. I've been to several games. Isn't it? I've been to several games there. Real quick story. We're leaving the game that you played in. 14-13 game. And I think Phillips was a freshman, and he played quite a bit in that game. We're leaving in the parking lot. Now, I've been in Las Vegas at this point for about a decade. We're in the parking lot. I got my Nebraska shirt on. A couple of my brothers with me, Nebraska shirt, the whole thing. And we haven't lived in Nebraska in a long time. And all of a sudden, they start an inbreeders chant when they see us with our Nebraska shirts. So here's the cool thing. Two of my buddies who are with us, who are from Vegas, but they're Vegas for Nebraskans. And they're trailing by about 20 feet, and they catch up to us. Rob, they're about your size. The inbreeder chants ran in the other direction at that point. Basically, I just was like pointing to them, like, look at these guys. So anyway, that was my Nebraska experience at the Rose Bowl. But I've been to at least 10 games at the Rose Bowl. I've never had a bad time. It is a blast. The only problem, I'll save the analysis for the Iowa game when we get there, is that UCLA fans are non-existent. That's the only problem with the Rose Bowl.
There may be more Iowa fans because they love going to the Rose Bowl. There might be more Iowa fans out there than UCLA fans. But let's start tonight in the National Football League. This is a hell of a game. You got the Steelers and the Washington Commanders. All of a sudden, the Commanders are like the team everybody wants to play for. This is a Sunday game at noon on CBS. Washington, a 3-point favorite, the over-under at 45.5.
Cliff Kingsbury got the exact quarterback that he loves to work with when you're talking about Washington. He's calling the offensive shots in Washington, Kingsbury, after, he liked Kyler Murray, but it just didn't work out in Arizona. But it's a different story with Jaden Daniels. I mean, he's putting up historic numbers for a good chunk of the season for a rookie. There is the Mike Tomlin factor, guys. And how about this? Mike Tomlin, as an underdog, 57-31-4 against the spread. It's impressive stuff. Pittsburgh's defense is getting a lot of credit right now. They played 8 games, 7 of which came against defenses ranked in the bottom third of the NFL. Only Atlanta has a decent defense, I guess you could say. And that game was the season opener before Cousins and the offense found chemistry. I should say offenses. I think I said defense that they played. It's the Pittsburgh defense, which has been great. The opposing offenses have been in the bottom third, except for Atlanta. And again, that was week 1. Washington is incredible in expected points per attempt per play. We've talked about that metric before. Drive-saving plays, things of that sort, that factors into EPA. The Commanders are fantastic through the roof. They'll score points. And one thing about Russell Wilson, starting again for Pittsburgh, he's going to go throw those big, high arc bombs downfield like he's been doing since he's gotten healthy again. And they're catching a few of these. So I think you're going to see a game that gets over 45.5. It's Washington or nothing for the side. But I do like this game to go over 45.5 as of now, midweek, cutting this video. And I might be on Washington come the weekend. Probably make a little wager on Washington in case it gets to 3.5, but I like them here in this spot. Again, I just don't think that Pittsburgh defense, which is getting all this credit, has faced an offense anywhere close to what Washington brings to the table.
Isn't it amazing how fast Washington's turned this thing around? I mean, it was the dumpster fire of the National Football League for so long, and just like that, they've turned it around.
Dan Schneider out of the picture?
Yes.
I think really Kingsbury's relationship with Jaden Daniels, but it's the play calling. I mean, he was good with Kyler Murray in Arizona. The thing that Washington does on offense is that they don't even need Jaden Daniels in the game. Look what happened when Marcus Mariota had to come in a few weeks ago. He went 18 for 23, pop, 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 hitting guys open all over the place. So they've done a great job of acquiring some really good skill players in the last couple of off seasons. You add in a fantastic offensive coach and a couple of quarterbacks who know this offense, and all of a sudden you're talking about a team that's going to contend and maybe win that division over Philadelphia, certainly over Dallas and the Giants.
All right, let's go to the college game. This is an intriguing game. Texas Tech just knocked Iowa State off the unbeaten ranks. They went on the road and actually showed up with a defense, which was totally surprising, right? Colorado's had the bye week. The Buffaloes at 6-2, still in the hunt for that Big 12 championship game. And I don't know if they're going to jump ahead BYU, but they're in that second place thing with one loss in the league. This is an intriguing game. The Buffaloes go to Lubbock, surprisingly, to me anyway, a 3.5-point favorite. You're over under a high-scoring game. They're expected at 62.5.
Didn't you guys think Colorado was going 4-8 after the way they played against Nebraska?
Yes.
I mean, it's just amazing. Easy. And so you got to give them credit, the coaching staff, the players, for turning that around. However, if they, the savior to their season was that extreme luck out against Baylor. If they lose that game in Boulder, which by all rights they should have, and don't get extremely lucky, All of a sudden, I think this season goes in the opposite direction that it has. But still, the bottom line, and I've talked about it since week one, my favorite college football quarterback, who I think should be the number one pick in the draft for quarterbacks next spring, is Shedeur Sanders. The guy has been simply amazing. His last 4 games, guys, he's completed 110 of 138 passes.
Wow.
That's 80% his completion rate. He doesn't have a great offensive line. He makes all the right decisions. So this week, you've got that going against Tech's 133rd ranked defense in passing yards allowed per game. That's a little scary. The positives for Tech, like a lot of people will talk about, oh, they just came off a big win, and are they going to get past that? I like teams off big wins. What I don't like are teams that lost heartbreakers all of a sudden having to play and get up for the next game. That's tough. But I think Tech will have some confidence. And I also believe that it was pretty impressive that they were able to upset Iowa State despite having a quarterback who completed just 21 of 40 passes, 2 picks. They committed 10 turnovers, and yet they were able to win that football game against a good Iowa State team. Listen, Baron Morton isn't going to go out and complete 18 of 20 passes. He's just not going to do it for Tech. But he doesn't throw picks. He's got 19 touchdowns, only 5 INTs on the season. And the key to this offense is going to be Taj Brooks, 1,000-yard rusher, over 5 yards per carry. He's healthy. If he's able to run the ball, they can upset Colorado in this game. This is another one where I like the total as a midweek. I think it goes over 62.5. Guys, I'm digging and hoping if I do come up with a play here, it's going to be on Tech. That's where I'd like to go in this game. If Brooks is able to pick him up and put him down for even 4.5 yards per carry, it opens things up for the pass too. But the caveat, the big caveat, there is in every game, is Shedeur Sanders going up against this Tech pass defense, which has been pretty bad for most of the season.
Scott, I think Dr. Rob and I both have a question for you, but maybe for next week's Behind the Point Spread. And it is this, because, you had Iowa State coming off the bye week, which lost to Texas Tech. Colorado's playing Texas Tech this week, coming off a bye week. Nebraska's got a bye week this week, going to USC next week. Can you find some metrics for us next week about what teams do coming off a bye week? And how successful they are?
In the past, it's been a good thing, but we haven't seen a lot of good things off bye weeks for college football teams this year, or they're just so glaring and involve the games that we're really following that it looks worse than it is. But I'll definitely do that because, in the past, it was always good to have a bye week mid-season, give you guys a rest.
But
the other question I had, you mentioned about a team coming off of a tough loss, or like a real, I can't remember the word you used, but like a really hard loss.
Yeah.
Because the week prior to beating Iowa State, didn't Tech come off of a really tough loss to Texas or TCU?
Yeah, let me qualify that a bit because Tech's lost a couple of games already. So Iowa State coming off a loss. And
it's different for them.
Yeah. And
I got you. That makes sense. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So if you're like 6-0, 7-0, and your head's filled with we might be going to the playoffs and you lose that game when you've just cracked into the top 10, basically, that's harder to come off of than if you're 3-3 and off a heartbreaking loss.
Gotcha.
So
that
I should qualify that. That's a good question, Rob. And also wanted to mention that it might not be as big of a deal with the 12-team playoff. What you do know is you can't lose this game, but you're not out of it yet because you lost one game. Where a year ago and before, anytime before this season, if Iowa State lost that game to Tech, they're done. Forget about it. There's no playoffs. So that might help out. It's going to be interesting to watch these teams 8-0, 9-0. Let's say, for instance, I don't think they will, but Indiana gets knocked off by Michigan. Indiana still knows at 9-1, they could be a playoff team. It's not like the old days as of last year or before. When you lose a game this late in the season, you're done. One of my favorite bowl plays for more than once has been, gosh, I love the fact Iowa's, going into the Big Ten title game or their final game and they're 11-0. Oh, they got beat. They're 11-1. They go to some minor bowl game and you play the other team because Iowa's dreams of a national title or playing for one are gone. Sorry, Travis, but this is
just rubbing it in. Now you're just being mean, Scott. You're just being mean now.
It has been. I gotta be honest with you. It's been play against them in a bowl game if they win undefeated until the end of the season. Huh?
I don't want to hear the truth. I need my ego boosted a little bit. We were just talking about Iowa State. Iowa State lost for the first time, not out of the playoff mix yet. This is an intriguing game. You look at the records and you think, well, Iowa State's going to run away with this. I believe, and I could be wrong, Scott's going to correct me if I am, I think Kansas has had the lead in every game this year in the fourth quarter. I think that's true. Or for the majority of their games, they've had a lead in the fourth quarter. They have not lived up to expectations. They had very high expectations. They have 2 wins on the season. They're going to play in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium. Iowa State's going to go there with a 3-point favorite. There's going to be a ton of Cyclone fans there. You got the over-under at 50 on this. I think it's going to be – I actually think it's going to be higher scoring than 50, but that's me. What are your thoughts on the game, Scott?
Yeah, and it's hard to judge this team, Kansas, because they lost again. They found another way to lose. At what point of the season do they come out without the motivation that they've had at the start of games? A couple of weeks ago, I think I texted you, Travis, and I mentioned Kansas, my favorite play, playing Houston in that game. It was a perfect setup. And I was like, man, if they can just keep from turning the football over, they ought to knock this team all around the field. And they were able to do so. Then they come out and they look like they're turning things around. Maybe they can get to 6-5, 7-5 by the end of the year. And all of a sudden they get beat again because they found a way not to wrap up a game they could have won. That starts to, you're 9 weeks into the season now, 10 weeks, whatever it is. And you start to wonder at what point does that affect them to where they're not coming out with that same motivation out of the locker room. So you got that going for Kansas. You got Iowa State this deep into the season, all of a sudden losing a game. But Matt Campbell, again, can tell his troops, this isn't the old days. We can still get to a playoff situation if we win out, even with that one ugly loss to Texas Tech as a big favorite. Tough call which team is going to get over last week's loss, I think. One thing about Matt Campbell, his Cyclone teams have only won 2 of 11 games after they've won at least 5 of the previous 7 games. So last week was like right in line for Matt Campbell.
Wow.
And they're in a spot again where they're 2-9 in this kind of situation, having won 5 or 6 out of the previous 7 games. Guys, I lean Kansas in this game. I think every week we find one game where I say, I think this is a good potential candidate for in-game betting. I think this is it. Because if Kansas comes out with the same steam they've had at the start of all their games, they can win this game. If they're done, if they've cashed it in because of all these tough losses, then you might jump on Iowa State early in this game.
Man, interesting call. I think it should be a fun one to watch. I happen to be good friends with Lance Leipold, head coach at Kansas. Not name dropping there. We go back from his days at UNO, and a good guy. And I know this is eating him, right? I can just he's one of those intense guys. So I don't think they're the type to quit on him. Some teams quit on a coach. I don't think they're going to kick, even though it's not gone well. I don't think Kansas is going to quit on Lance Leipold.
Don't you think, Rob? I mean, if you quit on Leipold, you got a problem. I like Leipold a lot as a head coach.
Oh, I do too. I think he's a very good coach.
Yeah.
But it's, I think Norvell at Florida State's a good coach. I think Matt Rule at Nebraska is a good coach. I mean, good coaches have bad years too. I mean, there's guys like Saban and Bob Stoops and Urban Myers who don't have bad years unless you go to Jacksonville. But
the weird thing is buying into your hype, right? And go back when Brock Purdy was a senior at Iowa State. They were loaded. They were expected to go to the playoff. They had a crappy year. I think they only won 7 games that year. Kansas was expected to. Sometimes these teams that aren't used to the spotlight, do they buy into their own hype and think they're better than what they are, and they kind of let the guard down a little bit?
Man, I don't know. I could see that happening. I haven't been on a team like that. So it's hard for me from a firsthand experience to say that. I don't know. It may be just one of these things. Sometimes you have a few injuries. Sometimes the team dynamic's a little bit different one year to the next. And so sometimes you just have a bad year. I'd love to say this is kind of like a sophomore slump. It's just that Leipold's had a couple of years. He's had a couple of good seasons down there. And now all of a sudden you have this one bad season. I don't think you give up on the guy. I don't think as a player, I don't think you do.
Keep him there.
But it is hard to. It's kind of like what Scott says. At some point, you hit a point where it becomes, well, what are you playing for?
Yeah.
And as a coach, you got to find new and novel ways to motivate guys, and go out there. And sometimes it's just a matter of playing for pride. But that was kind of one of the things that we've talked about with Osborne, that, the big motivation for Osborne was never the actual win. We were worried far more about technique and fundamentals and certain statistics than we were worried about actually winning the game. And we went into every game with that mindset. If you're not a successful team, it's hard to do that, however.
Well, he was, those teams that you played on with Osborne and his whole career was so John Wooden-esque. We do what we can do in practice, and nobody's going to beat us kind of attitude. And that's, what you saw out of Wooden all those years with UCLA. You saw it out of Osborne. We do what we do, and we're probably going to win the game. And if we do what we do and we get beat, we got beat by a much better, or not much better, but by a better team that had to have been elite level, to beat us kind of attitude. So I don't know. I like Lake. I think what happened, they didn't read the press clippings. I think what happened was you had a quarterback who he made some mistakes early on. To me, it looked like a guy, and I could be wrong, but to me, it looked like a guy who felt like he had to make a play in a couple of games early on. And so he forced a couple of passes that he shouldn't have tried to make. And it was at the wrong time late in the game, and they lost those games. And they just found ways to make they can still go to a bowl game, got to win out. Maybe that's the motivation this week.
All right, let's go to out to the Rose Bowl, shall we? It's Iowa at UCLA. Of course, the Hawkeyes coming off a huge win over Wisconsin, ran for 329 yards. Caleb Johnson, one of the best running backs in the country. UCLA maybe shocked a lot of people last week, found a running game. The worst rushing team in the country rushes against one of the best rushing defenses in the country, Nebraska, pulls off the upset at Memorial Stadium. Iowa will be a 5.5-point favorite at the Rose Bowl. A low-scoring affair expected in this at 44.5.
All right, guys, I gotta bring the notes up here because this is I got some stuff on UCLA that I didn't want to forget here. So
this is going to be interesting.
Yeah,
he's here to burst my bubble is what he's here to do.
Well, I'm not trying to, but I don't go into every show looking to do it. But they opened 6.5 Iowa, and the market came in and said, wrong, we're on the Bruins. And this number came down from 6.5 to 5.5. When numbers move like that, Sunday night, Monday morning, that's wise guy. That's sharp. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but it's sharp action. That's not public action at all, especially on a game like this, which kind of flies under the radar as far as, public attention is concerned. But anyway, they go from 6.5 to 5.5. The Bruins gave up, and I'm going to go to my notes here. The Bruins gave up a touchdown to Minnesota with 27 seconds to go in the game and lost 21-17 a few weeks ago. They are 27 seconds away from 3-0 the last 3 games. They outgained Minnesota by 95 yards. They outgained Rutgers by 56. They outgained Nebraska by 36. And in fact, UCLA has held their last 3 opponents, how about this, to 96 rushing yards on 3 yards per carry. That's what they've done against the run against those 3 teams. They also held those last 3 opponents to 3 touchdowns and 3 picks and about 59% passing, so below 60%. Offensively, UCLA, there's still not much on the ground. If you can stop the pass, you can stop this team. But Garbers has been heating up. He's 74 of 99. That's a 75% completion rate, 9 yards per pass, almost 300 yards per game, 6 touchdowns, no picks in his last 2 games. And that 74 of 99 goes back 3 or 4 games now. Be careful, Hawkeyes. No one's running on UCLA. UCLA is doing what they want as far as the passing game is concerned. They are, believe it or not, 11th in college football against the run, talking about the Bruins, which shows, again, Satterfield made some really dumb plays. I would hope he would have this information in front of him. So anyway, Iowa has gone one-dimensional the last 6 quarters, 129th in passing yards on the season. We do know that. And before last week's results, Iowa was power rated just 6 points better than UCLA on a neutral field. Now, again, I only give the Bruins about 2 points for their home field because there will be 20,000 Bruin fans and 50,000 Iowa fans at this game. It's going to be close to that. If I could bet on this, if I was a bookie, I would say I'd put the over-under at 20,005 as far as UCLA fans at this game. It'll be filled with Hawkeye fans, both those who have moved out to the LA area and, of course, those coming from the Midwest for the game. So I jumped in a little bit more here. The Rose Bowl, as I mentioned, a weak home field. UCLA first half, the last 6 games, almost dead even. They've scored 74. They've allowed 76 points. They've only given up 21 first quarter points in 6 games, the last 6 games. They outscored Nebraska, Rutgers, and Minnesota 44-17 in the first half. No first quarter points allowed in 3 of the last 4 games. They shut out Penn State until 6.5 minutes to go in the second quarter. This is not the Bruins we saw 6 weeks ago. So if they struggle early with this one-dimensional Sullivan-led offense, this could be a long afternoon for Iowa fans. Not that they're going to get whipped or anything like that, but they could certainly lose this football game. I challenge you, over the last 4 weeks, go and find metrics and numbers like that. What are you going to find? Maybe 8 to 9, maybe 10 teams in college football that are better than what I just mentioned. I mean, I should have been looking at this last week for Nebraska in that game, and we didn't. And, I learned my lesson.
Let me counter, and I don't have any stats. I don't have the math with me. I just had my eyes because I've watched every Iowa game there is. And they're a different team with Brendan Sullivan at quarterback, though. It has a completely different spark. You're right, they're one-dimensional, but the fact that he's able to run and Cade McNamara wasn't has added a completely different dynamic to this offense.
Absolutely. That's why, we had Iowa last week, because the over, in fact, because, we thought that Sullivan would give them something against that opponent with his feet that Cade McNamara has never been able to do. And the problem is now is if you can't duplicate that against the Bruins, 11th in the nation against the run, you better be able to pass the football. And we don't know if Sullivan can do that yet. He's not had to throw the football very much when he's played. So we'll see. I mean, again, I'm giving you reasons why the so-called, I hate using that term. It sounds so stupid. Everybody in a book in Las Vegas thinks they're connected. It's funny as hell. But anyway, and none of them are. But I hate using that term, wise guys. I'll just call them sharps. And they jumped on UCLA, and those are basically the reasons they did so, whether they win or not.
All right, let's go to the SEC. This is a hell of a football game. Alabama's going to go to LSU. This is a primetime game Saturday night at 6:30. The Tide on the road going to be a 3-point favorite against the Tigers. Your over-under set at 58.
What a game. Losers likely out of the playoff mix, right? 3 losses. They're not going to be chosen for the top 12. I do like the Bama coaching staff, by the way. We've talked about it before. I like DeBoer. I like who he's got around him. There's just a transition that has to be made. And some of these Saban fundamentals, which were the best in college football, have been lost a little bit. But again, I like DeBoer, and Tide fans might not want to hear that. What I'm not crazy about is the Bama defense. They're not what they were for most of that Saban era. They're not making the same type of plays they did this year. They're kind of middle of the pack against the run. They gave up, 170 rushing yards per game to Tennessee, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. And the only reason Georgia only ran for 80 yards is because they fell behind so early, but they threw for 439 yards against Alabama. So they did what they had to, and they were able to get it done. The concern is with LSU not having much of a ground game. I always, you hear me say this a lot. I like looking at teams and how they can do on the ground and how they can do against the run. And still to this day and age, if I got a team that can't run or can't stop the run, it's going to be few and far between when I'm plunking my money down on those teams. So LSU doesn't have much of a ground game, but they have the best wide receiving core that Bama is going to face this entire season. And the Tide like to play man coverage. That's what they do. It was an ego thing, but they were also great at it with superior athletes under Saban. They're still playing a ton of man coverage. So what they did, though, is they struggled at times against the Vols. They struggled against Georgia playing man coverage. So I think if you're LSU, attack early. Go after them, man. Attack early. Throw a couple of deep passes. If you find success, you make Alabama press more. They're not comfortable in doing that. Brian Kelly, by the way, has never lost a home game at night. Folks are going to be schnockered a little bit at Baton Rouge this week by the time this one kicks off. He's never lost a home game in Baton Rouge when the sun's been down. And he also went 1-1 with Saban, against Saban. I'm going to lean towards LSU here, guys. It's a slight lean, but boy, I just want to see them test that Bama man coverage early and see if they can get Bama out of their comfort zone.
I don't have I don't have a dog in this fight, but I hate Brian Kelly. There's something about him I just don't like. I want to see the guy lose like all the time.
Well, and Caleb DeBoer is such I don't know. He's a guy that I think is easy to get behind, so it makes it even better in that regard.
Yeah, I like DeBoer.
Yeah, I'm with you. The fact that he started at Sioux Falls College is super cool too, right? I mean, people forget that he started at Sioux Falls College. Are they getting ready?
Sioux Falls University.
Is Sioux Falls University going to play Augustana anytime soon? Are they playing this
Saturday?
Are you going up there for it?
Yeah, that's a big rivalry game for both schools. They do not like each other. So
are they comparable size schools or not?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the numbers at Sioux Falls. I actually think Sioux Falls University might be bigger.
Really?
Augustana is not a big school. I think it's really only around like 2,500, 2,800 students.
Okay.
So
I got to ask you guys, just because you brought up Sioux Falls and it has the same kind of name, but Sioux City, Iowa, Morningside.
no,
No. I just got to ask you.
different animal.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you also if Morningside is still playing football at a decent level.
Oh, actually, at a very high level, Scott, they went to NAIA and they've won a couple national titles. They're one of the best NAIA schools out there. They've won 4 national titles.
Wow. I think they won 4 in like a 6-year span.
Yeah, really.
Like every year, it's like it's kind of weird because the NAIA national title runs through the state of Iowa. It's Morningside, it's Grandview, it's Northwestern University. Those 3 schools every year.
I don't know if I ever told you guys, but I did a recruiting visit to Morningside when I think it was a junior at Bellevue West, and went up there and checked it out for a week. And it was basketball season. Dean Thompson and UNO were like number 1 and Morningside was number 2. And the place was rocking. The gym was completely full. But their claim to fame at the time was that they were like in the center of the country. And, I didn't see too many bookie parlors and all that kind of stuff. But they put me and a kid from Millard in the same dorm room for that weekend. I think he ended up going to Nebraska Wesleyan, if I remember right. But it was interesting. It certainly, nothing against Sioux City. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And
that's
was
okay. You can talk about Sioux City bags on Sioux City.
You can move back now, Scott, because there's a Hard Rock casino right there on the river, or you can go over to Larchwood and go to the other casino that's on the Iowa side. There's plenty of books up here for you. We can put you over in Council Bluffs. We can put you at the Horseshoe. We can put you at Ameristar, Harris.
13, 14 years from now, when I'm 70, maybe I'll move back there and try to run a book.
No, nobody goes from the south to the north when they're 70. It's the other way around. Just to let you know. There's no reason.
I'm moving to Thailand, guys. That's where I'm going in a few years.
Our final game tonight, another SEC game. This is going to be a good one. Georgia, these guys are back into it. Going to go to Ole Miss. I got to talk to my daughter. Of course, she works at Ole Miss. It's going to be crazy in Oxford. One of the best places to watch a college football game, at least tailgate for a college football game. If Ole Miss, which has 2 losses, Scott, wins this game, is Lane Kiffin and the Rebels back in the college football playoff mix?
I think they are. If he wins this game, I mean, this would be huge for Ole Miss, obviously. And that number is not really, I haven't seen a whole lot of people jumping in on Georgia to drive that number up to 3, which I think is kind of interesting midweek after a few days of betting. But listen, here's the thing. I mean, Carson Beck throws 6 picks in his last 2 games. They won both. That's crazy. The D-line dominated Texas, as we all know. And I think this game will come down to whether or not Georgia gets pressure on Jackson Dart. Dart's a 71% passer this year, 21 touchdowns, only 3 picks. And how about this? The kid averages 11 yards per pass, 11 yards per attempt, Jackson Dart. And they throw the ball. It's not like they're throwing the ball 5 times a game. So LSU got a ton of pressure on Dart. They sacked him 6 times. Kentucky sacked Dart 4 times in the game against them. And Dart went from a 71% passer with all that pressure to a 60% passer. LSU and Kentucky, he only got 2 touchdown passes and a pick. And his yards per pass, I just told you it's 11 yards. It was like 7.5 against the 2 teams that got pressure on Ole Miss and were able to overcome that offensive line a little bit. Georgia had 7 sacks against Texas and none against Bama. I think they're going to disrupt the Ole Miss RPO. They'll get pressure on Dart and win this football game. Kirby Smart's last November loss was 2020, the COVID year. And that was a COVID year. Weird things were happening. Wow. He's not lost in November in 4 years. I think they'll get pressure enough on Dart to kind of do what LSU and Kentucky did to the Rebel offense.
Wow. And then there's Nebraska. That's all we do is lose in November.
Jeez, Rob.
A lot of times in October, too.
I'm pissing some Husker fans off. I apologize to everybody for that.
But you're not lying. It's the truth. It's sometimes people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I said this online the other day when they right after they lost to UCLA. And I said, if they go from 5-1 to not making a bowl game, isn't that as bad as anything that happened under Scott Frost?
Yeah, we did it last year. That was more Mickey, but
yeah. But I'm serious. I mean, this is as bad as anything that happened under Frost on the field, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd give you that.
Because I think the talent's better right now than they had.
And the schedule's soft. They got a soft schedule.
Yeah, the schedule's not that hard. I mean, that's the thing that's so tough about this. I mean, well, here's okay. it's hard for me to bag on schedules anymore just because I look at that's awfully subjective. I mean, who would have thought Illinois would have been
a decent team? But they've
they're not a
tank.
great team. I mean,
right.
they've hit a little bit of a rough patch, but I mean, they're not as bad as people thought they were going to be. Indiana's obviously nowhere near what people thought they were going to be. UCLA, I mean, when you look at UCLA, you look at the stats, you look at who they played, and I mean, the numbers that you just put up, Scott, UCLA is not a bad team.
Right.
They've got the ability to play some good football, and I think they're gonna turn some heads here second half of the season.
They had to get used to
or last
new
third
coach.
of the season.
I'm punching this up here, guys. Keep talking because I'm going to tell you. It might be too far back. I'm going to have to dig for it. I'll have to text you guys to tell you what Indiana would have been against Michigan before the season began. Power ratings, Indiana's up 14 points from where they began. Their power rating. I am looking at that.
Wow.
And Michigan, let's see Michigan here. Michigan was never super high this year after the coaching change and the quarterback situation. I mean, so right now, Indiana on a neutral field going into last week, let's see, they would have been about 6 points better than Michigan on a neutral field. So if you put in a 14-point change, you're talking about they would have been an 8-point dog to Michigan before the season began on a neutral field. And then if you take away, I don't have Michigan's before preseason power ratings, it was a couple points bigger than it is now. You're talking Michigan on a neutral field would have been a double-digit favorite over Indiana before the season began. And now look at that number.
Wow.
You know, Indiana's laying a ton of points at home against the Wolverines. It's amazing this college football season, how much things have changed basically in just 6 weeks.
Did you put any futures down on college football and have any of those come in yet?
The only thing I got going is I played Oregon to win the national title. That was the only thing I did. It had to do with maybe Ohio State gets knocked off by Michigan at some point. I like the fact that Oregon was hosting Ohio State, although I wasn't super confident they would beat the Buckeyes. Still think if that game would have been played in Columbus or a neutral site, Ohio State comes out with the win, but they didn't. So the ticket's still good. And, if they can win out Oregon, they're going to get one of those top seeds, the top seed in the postseason.
Oh, absolutely.
And that matters a lot, I think. So that's all I got going right now. I didn't do the Buckeyes because of their schedule. I didn't do Georgia because of the SEC schedule. And I figured Georgia will be a playoff team, but they might not be one of the top seeds, and Oregon's got a better shot. We'll see if it happens. That's all I had as far as a future that would go throughout the entire season. I had some wins totals. I have Iowa State over, had the Hawkeyes over. They've not all done great. I have Missouri over. They're all still around beating that total, especially Iowa State. Did I see something, by the way? I got to ask this to Travis, being from Iowa. Would this be the Iowa State Cyclones' first ever 10-win season?
Yes, I believe so. They were trying to go 8-0 for the first time in school history. I don't think they've won 10 games.
Yeah, I think and same with Indiana. Yeah. Indiana's never won 10 games in a season. Hard to believe.
Iowa State's got a tough road to go, though, because they've got Kansas this week, then Utah, and then Kansas State. So they've got, I think they've got one more. They got Cincinnati in there, too. So they've got 4 games left. And Kansas, it's Cincinnati, Utah, and Kansas State. That Kansas State game is going to be a hell of a game, too.
This would help me quite a bit if they get by KU straight up this week.
So Scott's rooting for Iowa State this week. Hey, if you want to work with Scott on a weekly basis, text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get the free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit DocSports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. Good games coming up this week, right? I mean, this is going to be a fun week of college football.
A fan standpoint and a betting standpoint.
There you go.
It's going to be fun.
All right, for Dr. Rob Zadiska, he's Scott Spreitzer. I'm Travis Justice. Give this video a like, leave some comments, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with another edition of Behind the Point Spread. We'll see you later.